My name is Joseph Wunderlich. I'm a professor of engineering, architecture, and computer science. This is a lecture on Frank Lloyd Wright's residential works. This lecture, focusing on residential architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright, has excerpts from my previous lecture series that I've developed over approximately the past decade and as part of a book I'm writing on Frank Lloyd Wright.
So beginning with his early childhood up until about age 19, he's influenced by his mother and father, early on with his mother through the affordable blocks, and then mostly time in Wisconsin. So again to his organic architecture. The American house, he says, had no sense of unity, nor sense of space, as should belong to a free people. The thing was more of a hive than a home, a box with a fuzzy lid cut up with holes to let light and air in, with an especially ugly hole to go in and out. Floors were the only part of the house left plain after Queen Anne had swept past, Victorian Queen Anne. Bowels, circulation, and nerves were new to buildings, all the engineering that came after the Industrial Revolution, which he was born into. So you see his character developing. I've already talked a little bit about this project here. Many of you have already watched a whole lecture on this skeleton beneath the skin. You can click on the PDF in the YouTube here. If you come back into the PDF files, if you're watching this on YouTube, the PDF will be down below as a link. But he says form and function are one. He referred to the barn and its post and beam framed interior like the skin of your hand, defined by the skeleton beneath. So often my freshman architecture students, I ask them to make a skeleton of a barn with balsa wood first, a design of their own, and then later put the skin on the building, but to think of the skin while they're making the skeleton. Then, a very important mentor, he approaches Louis Sullivan, and he loved that he was the way he thought and really wanted to work with him. Louis Sullivan was mostly a commercial versus residential home building. He was a commercial architect, high rises, known as the father of high rises. The Guarantee Building from Louis Sullivan. They had in common that neither one of them liked neoclassicism, the Greek and Roman styles that you can see in this picture here. The Chicago World's Fair went on around or at 1893. Neither one of them liked it. Frank Lloyd Wright criticized it as with quoting this French poet saying, "It's the setting sun all mistook for dawn." So it was a big trend for everybody to do neoclassicism. Neither Frank Lloyd Wright nor Louis Sullivan liked it. They wanted a whole new American architecture. He did, however, like the Japanese, Frank Lloyd Wright liked the Japanese pavilion that he saw at this World's Fair in Chicago, a replica of the Ho-O-Den Phoenix Hall in Japan. He was also very interested in Japanese woodblock prints and would have quite a rich understanding of Japanese culture and art from an early age. This is the real or the actual Phoenix Hall in Kyoto. I had a chance to visit Japan in 2013, saw many sites. Unfortunately, I didn't see this one in Kyoto. There's 60 sites. We did spend a week and a half in Kyoto. I should have taken the time to go to this one. He's noticing the open floor plan in there, which he will later become well known for in America. Another picture of Japanese architecture. He rose to chief draftsman in charge of 49 others. He would refer to Louis Sullivan as his Liebermeister, the dear master. He was given a 5-year contract, and then, I have it in red here, at age 22, asked Louis Sullivan for a personal loan to build a house, and he got one. I also met his wife, Catherine Tobin, who was 17. He met her when he was 21 at a church social. And so Frank Lloyd Wright is now in charge of residential projects, and partly to pay back the loan, the personal loan. So we're going to focus a little bit now on some of the simple geometries you can see in Frank Lloyd Wright's work. This is his home that he borrowed money from Louis Sullivan to build, a personal loan. And you can see the four-ball blocks on the left here that we saw in an earlier lecture. Also, this video log I'll be referring to, and I want you to watch parts of later on. This is a video log lecture of 31 Frank Lloyd Wright sites that I visited in and around Chicago, including Oak Park, where Frank Lloyd Wright got his early start. This is on my YouTube channel. This was an excellent tour guide, very knowledgeable Chicago native, giving us a tour of his home, Frank Lloyd Wright's home. This is the entry foyer and main stairs, the second floor. This is a fireplace hearth. Typically, Frank Lloyd Wright put the fireplaces in the middle of the building. The chimneys were big, wide chimneys, typically in the middle of buildings. And you can see the strong geometries of this fireplace. Octagons here of these, it's a little bit hard to see. You can see it in plan view. But the banding of windows we're going to also talk about quite a bit here. Signature Frank Lloyd Wright. This is the living room. This is the dining room. Another picture of the dining room and the banding of windows and the breaking up of the box. This was the only bathroom for everybody in the house, including the 6 children. But it's very nicely lit with natural lighting. This is a picture I took. You could see the light coming in indirectly around this little alcove of the south-facing window. It also provides privacy. Here's the master bedroom. Another picture of the master bedroom. Tall ceilings, geometric shape of the ceiling. This is the nursery. This is the children's bedroom with the boys on one side and the girls on the other. It was initially his studio space. Then he started building a studio addition for himself and his employees. This is where you come in the front entry and you review plans with the clients. Tour guide showing how that worked. This is where the secretary sat at the entry. This is the main studio space and one of the drawing tables. This is my son. That's actually a safe in the background where they kept things. You see one of these also in the Roby house down near the University of Chicago. We'll talk about later. It's a 2-story open atrium in the studio space, letting in very nice natural lighting. And then this quote, part of it says, it's by Rudyard Kipling, saying, "Now, mark my word, we'll build the perfect ship." Now the playroom edition. This is a very interesting space. You can see a balcony up above. The children would put on plays up front, and the parents and guests would sit up in the balcony. There was a piano built into the wall, and there's a stairwell going down behind the playroom, and you can see the piano up above, and it actually allowed the music to flow through the house, as well as efficient use of space. In this slide, you can see the fireplace in the playroom and the influence of the geometric shapes of the four-ball blocks of his youth. Here you can see the tour guide pointing at a collection of four-ball blocks. Here's the barrel vault. You can see the simple geometry of that. Now let's take a look at some more geometric elements, details in Frank Lloyd Wright's houses. These are eyebrow windows in the bedrooms of the children in his home and studio in Oak Park. Now maybe consider it for your own design. So this is something I did in my Pennsylvania residence. You can see the eyebrow window. Here's a more close-up view of from the interior. bedroom, one of the bedrooms. And this is from a lecture here that I encourage you to come back and click on. This lecture on interiors in a materials and methods course that I taught, and you can see that on my YouTube channel. And then consider some simple geometries for what you're doing. So you can see I had an old farmhouse, and I wanted the same simple geometry coming out the extension. You can see on the left the before and then the after on the right. Then at age 26, the octagon and these what are called bootleg houses we'll talk about in a minute. Those towers are octagon in plan view. So he builds these, gets commissions for these two bootleg houses. There's actually a third also. And you can see the influences here. It's Victorian era, but he doesn't like all the frill of Victorian, including all the gingerbread, typical Queen Anne Victorian. So you can see the simple geometries that he's emphasizing here. Now, Louis Sullivan finds out about these bootleg projects, and he's forced to let Frank Lloyd Wright go. It's argued sometimes that Louis Sullivan must have known about these houses. They were all very close together to his home and studio. And however, this is a big firm, and Louis Sullivan has a partner, Adler, and employees, and so they needed to let Frank Lloyd Wright go because of this breach of contract to work just on the firm's clients' houses and designs. But Frank Lloyd Wright always referred to, throughout his life, to Louis Sullivan as his Liebermeister, his dear master. So now Frank Lloyd Wright is on his own. His first project of his own practice is here, the Walter H. Gale residence, also very close, right next to the bootleg houses and right down the street from his home and studio. You can see more of this in the video log, my video log on the YouTube channel at time 7:14. And you can see some very unique features of what he's going to be well known for later on here. Of course, the simple geometries we've already talked about, but now the banding of windows you can see in that turret, and also the long overhangs we'll be talking about a little bit later, especially when you get into the prairie style homes a little later. We're going to talk about window banding here. So now this is from my interiors lecture on YouTube channel. It's also, you can find it in my architecture theory lectures. But the idea of openings and the banding of windows and the principle here involved. So a window wall allows more daylight in views, and it visually expands space beyond the physical boundaries. And you know, if you weaken the corner, it also opens up the house, so you can band and wrap around the corners. And so you can read on here of the principles involved. This is a little more on the theory too. As an opening expands, it opens a room up to a broad vista. The large scene can dominate a space or serve as a backdrop for activities. More on banding windows. So come back and take a look at this video on Engawas, and we'll speak a good deal more in other lectures about the Japanese influence on Frank Lloyd Wright, including him going and living there and designing there for a while, for 5 years. And so the Japanese, it's very much part of their design, architecture, and the philosophy of life, the inside, outside of the Engawa and how that works. Essentially a covered porch, but a usable covered porch throughout the year. This is in my own design here, so I wasn't thinking specifically of Frank Lloyd Wright when I did this, but I had studied him for a while amongst other architects and throughout my life. So this is in the year 2000. First studying architecture and competed in architectural competitions starting in high school in the 1970s, and then began college in '79. So this was not a new thing to me, a new idea. But the banding of windows, Frank Lloyd Wright certainly pioneered that. This is a project of mine. This is another project I had in the late 80s, beginning of 1990s, where I renovated and put these skylights in a home. Designed that and built it myself. Although the Walter H. Gale residence that he designed when he was 26 years old was the first commission of his firm that he created after leaving Adler and Sullivan, this design here, the Winslow residence, was his first major commission for a much larger sum of money. This is the Moore residence in Oak Park, Illinois. And you can see this is one example where he turns away from the road. Traditionally, houses at this time or earlier faced the road with a porch, and horse and buggies went by not too long before this, or actually at this time also. So this, now he places the house at 90 degrees to the road and facing the sun with a large front yard. So this use of natural daylighting and the sun, this will become an integral part of his organic design. We're taking note of the Japanese-inspired designs of Frank Lloyd Wright and drawing some conclusions about the early influences and how Japanese architecture affected his designs throughout his life. Here's another one of those examples, the Chauncey Williams House residence in Lake Forest next to Oak Park. The Roland Furbeck residence in Oak Park, Illinois was a precursor to the more mature Prairie School style, with the more fully developed aspects of the Prairie School style, including the pinwheel plane, which we'll see on the next slide here, the central chimney, broad low-hip roof with long overhanging cantilevers, brick face up to the windowsill, limestone trim, symmetrical windows, banding of windows, and picture windows. And so here you can see the cruciform, the pinwheeled planes that in this design will be showing up later in the more mature, around 1901 Prairie School style of Frank Lloyd Wright designs. Now, I'll be coming back frequently and looking at Japanese influences, and so in this time period you see this design here, the S.A. Foster residence in Chicago, and you can clearly see, if you're familiar with Japanese architecture, the front gate that you look at there is very similar to the Japanese torii gate, Shinto shrine, or Shinto religion, symbolizing the entry from the human world into the spiritual world. Also, you see Asian influence in the way the roof gable ends extend out in a point, not the roof line doesn't follow the same distance in the eave of the gable there. It stretches out at the top. This is the Edward R. Hills residence, another example of some Japanese inspiration. This house was paid for by Mr. Moore of the house in the background that you can see as a wedding present to his daughter and future son-in-law. And here's a look at that same house from another angle, seeing the roofs that clearly look to be Japanese influence. Now we want to summarize some of Frank Lloyd Wright's organic architecture, his organic design and the beginnings of it. It was certainly influenced by Japanese culture and designs, including Japanese prints that he collected and was very interested in from early on. His visit to the Japanese Phoenix Hall Pavilion in the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, and then later he'll visit and design and live in Japan for 5 years. So you want to maybe come back, or you should come back and take a look at some of these videos that I've listed below here on Japanese carpentry, the Japanese masters, a video about a visiting apprentice, actually from Canada in Japan, not accepted right away, but then earned the trust of the Japanese people and became a master carpenter in Japan in recent times. And then the Ingawa, which is a covered porch kind of architecture, and the carpentry and the culture surrounding that. Now, this is Frank Lloyd Wright's words speaking of Japanese architecture. He had a very large ego and didn't want to admit that he was directly influenced by the Japanese. But he says, he's quoted as saying, the Japanese house is the closest, or the way of doing things was always organic. The Japanese house is the closest thing to our organic house, adapting and incorporating everything. When we speak of organic architecture, we are speaking of something more Oriental than Western. My work is in that deeper philosophical sense Oriental. And then he says another quote, ancient Greece came nearest, but not very close. And since later Western civilizations went too heavy Greek, the West could not have easily seen an indigenous and organic architecture. Civilization based on cultural inspiration, chiefly Buddhism, could. But it is not so much faith, but the principles of Lao Tse, the Chinese philosopher. So you can see he's certainly drawing on Asian influences from early on, and never like the neoclassicism, Greek and Roman revival that we spoke of earlier. So you can see some of the influences in what he saw in the pavilion at the World's Fair, and then in his own designs you see in the bottom here that we just discussed. He goes on to say that sense of the organic, Japanese art knows this. The word edibori means a formative arrangement of the branches of a tree. We have no such word in English. There's a picture I took in Kyoto of a tree. A little closer picture of that. And you certainly have seen with bonsai trees how they train the branches and guide them very, very old, hundreds of years old actually, some of the bonsai trees. And I'm sure this tree had some special pruning. So here's a link to some Japanese architecture and design and travels. I was a keynote speaker in Osaka, and then spent 2 weeks in Kyoto, as well as flying into Narita and taking the bullet train from Tokyo to Osaka. And most likely you're going to hear a whole separate lecture on that. Again, we summarize the influences on his organic architecture, the Wisconsin farms, the Unitarian love of nature, God and everything, his mother's 4-block teaching, his father's music and preaching, his mentors, architect mentors, Conover and Silsby and Sullivan, Japanese things, and then soon we'll see arts and crafts from England and America, and also soon a succession movement from Austria and graphic images, and then later social engineering with Usonian House, initial Taliesin Fellowship. And now that we've discussed the influences on his organic design, his organic architecture, I want to put it into a philosophy. So he states a sense of organic is indispensable to the architect knowledge of, Form and function lies at the root of the practice. Where else can we find the pertinent object lessons nature so readily furnishes? Then he says, by organic architecture, I mean an architecture that develops from within outward in harmony, as distinguished from one that is applied from without. More on his philosophy. Nature had become my Bible, grown form in realm of human spirit, a form more naturally significant of idea and purpose. And so he's opposing neoclassicism, senseless excess. All the modern architects did, but he was very different than the other modern architects. Senseless expediences he also opposes, Victorian ornamentation and compartmentalization. Right, the open floor plan breaks up that he initiates in American architecture. He's seen it in Japan, Japanese architecture. I haven't been there yet, but he's seen it. True ornament had to mean something, integral ornament. Building plasticity, like skin surface defined by skeleton. Aesthetic and structure become one. Form and function are one. Symbiotic, not one before the other, more like the yin and yang. Entry, the compression, embrace, and release, that's also going to be one of the design principles we're going to talk about in a second, comes after the philosophy. And then he says, I don't build a house without predicting the end of the present social order. That's speaking much more of just the building, much more than that. So then he's defined them all here, his design principles of his organic architecture, based on, we first looked at the influences and all that, and then as a philosophy. Now these are actual design principles. So what do you do? So, and this is, he states them in order here. Simplicity, true value of any work of art. Few rooms, openings as integral features of the structure. Excessive love of detail ruins fine things. Decoration is dangerous unless you understand it. Fixtures assimilated into the design of structure is what he wants. Furniture built in. Designs the furniture built in. There should be as many kinds of styles as there are kinds of people. Right? So he's not buying to one specific genre, and he recreates himself and the designs many times throughout his life. The building should appear to grow easily from its site and be shaped to harmonize with its surrounding. That's a very harmonious or green kind of organic thing to do. Go to the woods for color schemes. Use the soft, warm, optimistic tones of earths and autumn leaves in preference to pessimistic blues, purples, or cold greens and grays. Bring out the nature of materials. Reveal the nature of wood, plaster, brick, or stone. A house that has good character stands good chance of growing more valuable as it grows older, while house in the prevailing mode is soon out of fashion. And summing up, and so the pinwheeled planes create the cruciform, and that is by rotating two pairs of floor and ceiling planes, if you can imagine that, and making them perpendicular, and that defines the overall form of the structure. Here is the first of three designs, often cited as the very first of Frank Lloyd Wright's prairie-style homes. This is the Willits House in Highland Park, Illinois, a suburb of northern part of Chicago. This is in Oak Park. This is the Frank W. Thomas House. You can see in my video log. And the third is the B. Harley Bradley House in Kankakee, Illinois, south of Chicago. And here are those three houses, with each of them considered the first of the Prairie School style by different scholars and different authors. However, you'll see also that Frank Lloyd Wright said that the Thomas House was his first prairie house, and had earlier also said that his 1894 Winslow residence was a prairie style. However, the Thomas house is more of the mature, established prairie school style with all of the accompanying features. So the cruciform plus perceived vertical planes and examples of this, and the prairie style is the ultimate example of that. So a number of houses here. William Frick House, you can see in this video log. Now, other things on the horizontal now. So we're still in this time frame of his 30s that we're talking about, in the very beginning of his 40s. So we're looking at the horizontality and how he emphasizes the horizontal board and batten. So you put planks of wood, and then the battens are the thin pieces of wood that cover the gap. And you typically would see that vertically in the 1800s, early 1900s. And he's doing it horizontally. He's also mimicking that horizontal board and batten with the bricks. This is actually brick, and the way the bricks recess and protrude to create the horizontality. Now he takes his first trip to Japan, and now I'm taking photos that I'm showing photos that I had taken in 2013, and this was before these other photos, I believe, were available. They were in the archives in Taliesin and were not released until after 2013, and then I believe Columbia University may have them now. But then, recently, 3-4 years ago, I started seeing the similarities, so I put this together. So on the left is a photo by me in 2013. On the right is a photo by Frank Lloyd Wright in 1905, more than 100 years prior. Here's one up above of by Frank Lloyd Wright, and these the gates between the human and spiritual worlds in the Shinto religion. And you can see the one on the left, a huge thing. That's a tractor trailer down on the ground there. You see, you can imagine the scale of it. The one on the right's not quite as big. It would be difficult to build it that big now or then. Here's walkways, gradual sloping walkways by me in Kyoto. Not sure where the one on the right is, but it looks very similar. By Frank Lloyd Wright over 100 years ago. Here's a Buddhist temple on the left, the picture that I took, and one on the right in Kyoto that Frank Lloyd Wright took. Here's another one by Frank Lloyd Wright in Nagoya. This is a bell tower that you're not supposed to ring. Of course, we had to do it. We got scolded a little bit. And a similar one in Nagoya on the right, one on the left in Kyoto. And then the large monuments in Kyoto on the left, Kobe on the right. And then the people, getting pictures of the people. So this is on the left of Kyoto, a large group of children, all colored hats, very organized and orderly. And on the right, more than 100 years prior, still most likely the group order, maybe even more. So then, natural rainwater collection on the left and on the right here, before long ago and recently, doing the same thing. And then the people, there's a mother and child on the left that I took a picture of in Kyoto, and one by Frank Lloyd Wright in Nagoya with a father and son. The geisha, now they're not prostitutes, they're meant to represent symbols of Japanese artistry, and they're cultured, and they have simply the ultimate in manners, trained in the tea ceremony and the arts, and there's a whole lecture there for somebody who's a scholar in that. In this photo, you can see girls going back and forth between Kyoto College or Kyoto Kindergarten. There was no middle school or secondary high school there. It's a kindergarten and a college. And this is a residential neighborhood with a school embedded in it, and we stayed right near it. And there were several of these bridges over a canal that paralleled the big, one of the two larger rivers that run north-south. And then you see a photo on the right here taken by Frank Lloyd Wright more than 100 years prior. This is a funny picture on a story on the left here. This is 2013. The Japanese do wear masks all the time. We're in 2020 now, and everybody's wearing masks. But the Japanese, I've experienced meeting them in other countries and traveling with them, that they just routinely wear masks in public spaces, especially away from home. And then on the right, here's a photo by Frank Lloyd Wright in 1905. Some children my son and I met in Kyoto, teaching us some Japanese, and some children on the right, Frank Lloyd Wright, Nagoya. The Japanese gardens, if you ever have seen a Japanese garden, they're a beautiful thing. They're everywhere, of course, in Japan and Narita, which it seems like just the airport town for Tokyo, New Tokyo Airport, but it's worth staying there in itself. I don't know how many acres, probably over 100 acres of beautiful Japanese garden. And then you see one on the right, taking a picture in Kyoto, perhaps the same one. It could be taken by Frank Lloyd Wright more than 100 years prior. So a picture on the left here of that same park and same Japanese garden in Narita, and then one on the right in Nagoya by Frank Lloyd Wright, the pathway. I have a whole lecture on Japanese urban design and architecture, where I'll talk about paths, amongst other things. This is a beautiful path. Just take away the note there. You could just sit and meditate looking at this. It's such a tranquil place. That's the whole idea. And if you haven't been in a big Japanese garden, you should really try. And here's a quote, Frank Lloyd Wright. He had a very strong ego. He always denied that he was directly influenced by Japanese architecture and design until later in his life, but still, in his writings, he would say it was just a coincidence, but it seems like much more than that. He says here in the quote, "The West could not have easily seen an indigenous organic architecture. Civilizations based on cultural inspiration, chiefly Buddhism, could. My work is in that deeper philosophical sense." Here's something, a story for another time. Perhaps when I come back and look at this in detail, I'll come back and show you things. Now, I've been around Asian philosophy most of my life, teachings, and I was a teacher, a sensei of judo. Watashi wa judaka, watashi wa sensei shodan. And I had almost 200 students that I've promoted up to almost black belt. You can follow that link and see more about it, and a picture of my grandmaster there on the right. A story for another time. Now, here is one thing I'd like to stop and take the time to read here. I've taught freshman seminars for 21 years as of making this lecture, and there was in several of them, two of them, especially the one involving judo, but also ones involving architecture, I had Japanese topics and Japanese cultural parts where I would ask guest lecturers, Nobu Takahashi, one of our Japanese professors, and Mahua Bhattacharya, the director of the Japanese program, to come in and give some inspirational talks and educational, informative talks on Japanese culture. And so she would give the students these 10 words, and I would have them memorize them because they speak to the Japanese culture, and also there by extension to the architecture that comes from it. And then Frank Lloyd Wright, how he was inspired. And there's parallels between this philosophy and the Unitarian belief system that he grew up around, with his father as a preacher and his mother's strong Welsh Unitarian family. So omoyare is to be considerate, always be considerate. On means duty, right? The sense of duty. Ame means empathy, to actually, feel the emotions of others, empathize. Wa, extremely important. Group harmony. We teach that in judo classes. By the way, I taught a very scientific, philosophical, soft form of judo, rather than the hard MMA kind of thing that I do not care for. Um, Uchi means inner or insider. That's important if you're part of the group or not. That can get out of hand sometimes. You get a little tribal with that. Even now, nowadays everywhere, not Japanese, more in other places. Kensun, modesty, right? That's very important. Giri, moral obligation. Soto, outside or outsider. Garaman, persistence. Enro, restraint, show restraint. And Haji, shame. They can get a little carried away with that in Japan, but it's for the most part a very good thing to feel a little bit of shame if you are acting outside of cultural norms. So now, talking about Japanese inspirations here. So now I'd say recall Roby House because we already talked about that when we talked about the pinwheeled planes and the cruciform, also with the banding of windows in the previous presentation. But we're talking about it again here. And so let's look and see if we can see any Japanese influence here. You decide. Compare this. This is the interior view here from the bottom left to the upper right, Shinto series of the Shinto shrines in Kyoto. And certainly the Roby House, very important design. A good deal of pictures in that. And we did take a tour of that. That's a very popular one. This is on the University of Chicago campus. It's not in Oak Park. So now here's another design. Now we're looking at some more Japanese influence. This is clearly shows that. Now this is in the River Forest neighborhood next to Oak Park. This is the Isabella Roberts residence. You could see sticking up of the house, out of the house, what they just cut off there is a tree. There was a tree that was allowed to grow inside the house, and it got to a huge size, and they finally, obviously, had to cut it. Now let's talk about some things that were going on concurrent to when Frank Lloyd Wright was designing and also had some influence on him. The arts and crafts movement, which began in England and then moved to America and had its own form. And Frank Lloyd Wright, although not specifically an arts and crafts architect as such, is shown, as we'll see in the next slide here, in the Metropolitan Museum of Art on their arts and crafts movement page, with a picture on here of an entire room. This room was disassembled from the Frank Lloyd Wright Francis W. Little residence in Minnesota and reconstructed in the Met, in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, including the windows. Also, the secession movement in Vienna, Austria. Now, this is not so much an architectural movement as a graphic design and a cultural type of movement, but you can see the lettering and the drawing, the imagery, and how that might play into what some things you see of Frank Lloyd Wright. Now, at 41 years old, he also has 6 children and a family and quite a bit of responsibility on top of all these projects. And then the next period of time, things change quite a bit. Here's one of his many designs during this period when he's 42 years old that's perhaps very relevant to what's happening right now in the United States in 2020 and all over the world. So clients asked for many operable windows and cross ventilation to help cure their children of tuberculosis, which was very common then. And then I have here, and is a good design concept for COVID-19 today. So this is the Ingalls residence. This is in 1909, 111 years ago. Okay, so now a different topic here. And an important one, Frank Lloyd Wright, he leaves his wife and children. He runs off with the wife of one of his clients, and it is a major scandal, and they kind of flee to Europe. They travel around a little bit, and then they settle in Italy. They live in Fiesole, Italy, a town overlooking Florence, Firenze, Italia. So they're up on a hillside in Fiesole, Italy, looking down on Florence. Not quite this close up of the view. Here's the actual place that they stayed, the Belvedere, Bellino, Belvedere Villa. Here is the door to the Villa Belvedere that they stayed in Fiesole, Italy, looking down on Florence. There's a plaque on the building honoring Frank Lloyd Wright. She has his birth date wrong there. I just noticed on this as I'm saying this. He did fib a little bit about his actual age, and his mother went along with it to make him seem a little more precocious. He was actually born in 1867, but he would fib about being born a little later, so he would seem like a young prodigy a little more. And he was, but he needed to brag or exaggerate, embellish, even when he didn't need to, really. You can see the view here down on Florence from this villa. And here is an aerial view, Google Maps of Florence, Firenze in Italia. You can see the Duomo, dome of Maria del Fiore. And that has a whole story behind it, the Duomo. So Brunelleschi's Dome, a great book. I would highly recommend it. Maybe I'll make that required reading in one of the courses. My son had to read that for part of his schooling. And then you can see the relative location here up in the top right where they lived in Fiesole. Also, you'll see a link here. It says read. I'd like everybody to click on that, students certainly, and read this article about the details of when Frank Lloyd Wright lived here. A little more of the view, looking over olive trees, I believe. They look like olive trees. And you can kind of make out the Duomo in the upper right a little bit there. And then here is a picture again of where they stayed, and then where I was staying in 2004, very close, in Fiesole. And so Florence, and what he's seeing in Florence, which is right next to Fiesole. You'd see it from where he is. And the Duomo. Michelangelo's David is there also. Definitely worth seeing. And there's a whole museum of sculptures, marble sculptures, connected with this, or as part of this. These are photos taken by my son, Joseph John Wunderlich, in the museum where the statue of David by Michelangelo is located. Then we also visited the University of Florence School of Architecture. Here's my son looking, reading some books in the library of that university. And then we went and purchased some leather jackets. Florence is known for fine leather work. If you're a student listening to this presentation and required to understand and know some of this, I'd like you to click on where it says here. If you're on YouTube, look for the PDF version below in the comments. Otherwise, you'll find the PPTX with audio on my website or in Canvas database. And then also, if you see things on there to click on, other presentations, perhaps one on Roman times and one summarizing what's in these collection of pictures and videos. Look at that too and surf around in there. And then kind of for fun down here on the bottom left, unless I give you specific requirements otherwise, is my Italian personal dictionary, vocabulary, and I've made it so that I can print in color and cut this out and fold it. It fits nicely as a reference in my back pocket, so I don't use the electronics when I'm traveling. I know you can buy real-time on-demand voice translation now. That kind of takes the fun out of it. I like to know some of the language, especially Italian, before I ever travel there, and then you know, don't be looking at my technology when I'm interacting with humans. So this is the type of architecture he would be seeing on the left here as he's staying in Fiesole, Italy, overlooking Florence. This is a design that did not get built, but what he was intending to be a studio residence in Fiesole. And during this time, while he was there, he was making these drawings as part of a publication, a very influential publication in Europe, primarily. The Wasmuth portfolio, that's Wasmuth's the name of the publisher. And so I just have a couple of the images from that included here. So you recognize this is his home and studio in Oak Park from 1889. Also the Hertley residence in Oak Park, and the Roby House in Chicago, and there are many more. I've purchased this book, and there's quite a bit in it. And so then he returns to Madison, Wisconsin. First he lives in an apartment for a couple months in Chicago, and then designs and builds Taliesin on his mother's land. So take a look at these two pictures here. The one on the left is what he would be seeing in Italy when he was there, and then on the right is what he designs immediately after he comes home to the United States. This is the living room of Taliesin in Wisconsin, and you enter from a corner, and then you can see out the other corner, and that's direct exposure, inside, outside, framing the views, similar to Japanese things that he saw first in the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, and then on his first trip to Japan in 1906. So that is now an integral part of his organic architecture, which is certainly implemented in his prairie school designs. And you see here also. This is a floor plan of Taliesin, and you can see in the middle workstations, drafting stations for his apprentices and architects. This complex or this building will become the main site for the fellowship later on, where students come and learn. Then later after that, Taliesin West will open up, and the fellowship will turn into a master's degree program that lasts for quite a while, up until now. It's just recently been moved to a new thing. There's a little falling out between the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust and the school, Frank Lloyd Wright School. We'll discuss that in another lecture. So here's a good video that I recommend you stop now and take a look at, unless you're watching this on YouTube. If you are, there's a PDF below and the link that you can click on when you're done watching this, or you could stop this and come back into this. But if you're watching the PowerPoint with embedded audio, please stop now and take a look. Click on this link and watch this video, about 28 minutes long, by a historic researcher at Taliesin Preservation. And then come back. Now, I always like to bring in my own projects, and I was considering in this project in Pennsylvania that I've mentioned before, where I'm adding over 1,500-foot addition to an old farmhouse, and complementing the designs, the vernacular of the architecture in the area, but also adding new elements, some postmodern kind of designs, the eyebrow windows in a couple places, and you can see one in the bottom right-hand corner. There's a couple more also. But then I was thinking of a tower, before I constructed the whole thing, a tower, and I was taking pictures in Italy in various locations of towers, and so I hadn't really thought about what Frank Lloyd Wright had seen in Italy at the time. This was my own expedition for my own purposes. So this is one of the first designs after he comes back from Italy, and perhaps you can see some of the influence of the Italian architecture in the upper floor with the roof, and how the windows look a little bit different, maybe than some of his other designs, but similar to maybe what you've seen in some of the Italian buildings. He's also putting the many operable windows for natural ventilation, which is a very common thing to do in Italy, even though he did do that prior to going to Italy in the one house for the client whose children had tuberculosis, which we've already talked about. And then this is said to be one of his final prairie school style of homes during the peak time. Now, there are other ones after this, but this sort of marks a time where he's transitioning to different ways of design. And this is why we are ending this short time frame here, because his mistress is murdered. So, and it's a big, horrible thing, as you would imagine. It's not something I want to talk about the details of. It's not really relevant to his architecture, except you could see what it does to his life after this, and how you do actually see it in his future designs, and we'll talk about it a little bit. You can see that he's in mourning, and so he'll be going out to California after this, and to Japan, far away from. You should take a look at this. Now, this looks like it is a 50-minute video, I believe, but look at this first. Stop and look at this, and take your time, and then I'm going to parse it into pieces. Now, I guess you could come back and look at it later, but this is important to look at this. The time spent in Southern California, and it also speaks of Japan, too. And so they mention in this video about this Panama, California exposition, where he's looking at Mayan architecture, including ones that celebrate human sacrifice. And so these are, what it looks like, including tombs. And also, coincidentally, his mother had also, presumably, a couple of experts in this video, different, with UCLA's architecture school was very good, are saying that his mother most likely gave him these books that had these images in it. So he's seen this before, and now he's also seeing it again in an exhibition. And his mistress was just murdered in a very shocking way, and so he's presumably still in trauma. And then this other design that he does. Now, this is mostly Mayan also, but also a little mixture of Japanese and Viennese modern influences. Hollyhock House, 1917, and it's actually a good design. It's not very livable. It got donated to the city of Los Angeles, I believe, maybe the county, but or the state. Only after a couple of years, the person lived in it. But it's actually something worth looking at. I haven't looked at it yet. I've been to Southern California many times. Lived in California 5 years. I really need to get there. I've been meaning to. So another picture of that. Now, from 1917 to 1922, he's living 3 full years in Japan, working on the Imperial Hotel. And so, he visited a couple times before, but now he's going and he's living there, and he's really immersing in Japanese culture. In the interior. And this is kind of a fun one, just to look at the faces of the people and wonder what's going on. This is long before World War II. Remember, this is before World War I, and then in World War I, Japan was an ally of ours. So we got to keep all these things in context in mind. Here he states, and this is another little video. Just take a look at. Japan was the gateway to that great East of which I had been dreaming since I had seen my first Japanese prints. So he collected Japanese wood block prints. Was certainly influenced from early on by Japanese things. Now, this is something I'm pursuing here, looking into the Unitarian belief system and how that possibly related to the Buddhist philosophy and Shinto beliefs. And you'll see this is actually a web page talking just about that, a web page for the Unitarian. They merge with the Universalists, but I mean, it's essentially the same thing as the Unitarian religion. Frank Lloyd Wright's mother's family was really big in. So this is a slide again of Dr. Bhattacharya that gave to my students 15, maybe more years ago, somewhere over the past 20 years, of key terms that speak to the ways of in Japan, philosophies. So could look for similarities between Unitarianism and these key concepts. So also while Frank Lloyd Wright is in Japan, so he's doing a couple little designs here. The Sakyu Heiashi House. It's kind of beautiful how the water's going up to the building. Did a similar thing in the Imperial Hotel. And water certainly has a significance, spiritually, even in Japanese culture. And you see it in Japanese gardens everywhere. And there's different kinds of Japanese gardens. Zen gardens and more ornamental gardens. This is the Arenobu Fukuhara House in Kanagawa Prefecture. The prefectures are the states, if you don't hear them referred to much. But if it's not in a city per se, it's in a prefecture. Most of the cities are in prefectures. I mean, they all are. All the cities are in prefectures. Like our cities in the United States are in states. So he's 51 years old, 1918. This one actually, unfortunately, got destroyed in earthquakes. Earthquakes are extremely common in Japan. So you hear about them in California and the San Andreas Fault. That's part of a ring of fire where the tectonic plate, the big giant Pacific plate, is rotating, and one edge is on California and the San Andreas Fault. The other side of that plate, with even more significant earthquakes, is Japan. And like Fukushima, for example, you probably remember, but there's been a lot of major earthquakes in Japan, destroying things all the time. So this house didn't withstand, but that's not saying anything about Frank Lloyd Wright's engineering capabilities. The Imperial Hotel was the only thing standing anywhere around in the big earthquake right after that was built, and they actually used the pond in front for emergency water, and they used the building for shelter and emergency triage. And so there's something to be said about that. That's a whole study in itself, just the engineering of that. And that was Frank Lloyd Wright's concepts, the way he did the foundation. You have to look at that. This is Teizaman Yamamura House in Yodoko, or it's also called the Yodoko Guest House in Hyogo Prefecture. 1918, he's 51 years old. Now, so he's coming back from Japan, and I have it in green, some of this stuff. So he's deciding to live in Los Angeles, and he's seeming pretty happy. Well, that's conjecture here, and you'll see something to the contrary in a minute. But so his son Lloyd, who by the way also was an architect and also joined Frank Lloyd Wright in Italy when he was there with his mistress in Fioroli, just close to Florence. I actually stayed very close to that when I was in Italy. I've gone to Italy 6 times and taught in Italy. So he's moving to Los Angeles. He wants to live there. However, presumably, as the people in the video, a good documentary, and others have stated too, and I seem to believe that he's still designing in this pre-Columbian burial or tomb-like kind of thing, and so maybe he's still in mourning. And so you see a number of houses here, and you can find videos on all YouTube. Click on any of these if you like. And there's good videos, several on each of these houses actually. So the Millard House in Los Angeles, I have not visited that yet. I really got to make a point of going to see these. But one's really dilapidated on the USC campus, and a couple are kind of hard to get to. Not real hard. I mean, I stay in nice parts of Orange County, so it's more than an hour away. I end up doing lots of stuff there. I didn't live in Los Angeles. I lived in San Francisco and San Diego for a total of 5 years. And then my wife's family's in the nice part of Orange County, far from Los Angeles. So, this is the John Storer House, still looking this Mayan look. Samuel Freeman House, same thing with these textiles. These are textile houses. Ennis House, textiles. And then, so you can see, I didn't put a video up here. You can find videos. I might post a video later of, this is actually a good published peer-reviewed paper, and transactions in engineering are always high quality with any kind of transactions, a journal. And so they're talking about, this is a seismic zone, all these tile houses. It's not unreinforced masonry. That's a disaster if you ever see that in an earthquake area, because it has rebar. These are cast concrete shapes with Mayan patterns, and then there's steel rebar, like a webbing, a weave that the blocks connect to. And they're talking about here, and you can click on this. It's probably an assigned reading depending on when you're watching this, to go and look at what it takes to replace some of these. They also have a problem with porosity too, because there's at the time they didn't really seal these things, and it's very porous, so these buildings leak also. So just talk about modularity now. Just a couple quick things on modularity. So he's innovating materials throughout his life, but perhaps more in his later parts. So this is what we call CMU, concrete masonry unit. You probably heard of his concrete block. That's a layman's term in the industry, architecture, engineering, construction. It's CMU, concrete masonry unit. And it is a form of formed concrete. I have a whole other lecture on concrete you can look at. This is on blocks. And so you can take a look and click on the PDF or the PPTX-w audio. And you can see. And this I also have here, it says European version of USA concrete masonry unit. I took that in Mons, Belgium. My uncle used to live there. He passed away, lived there for 30-something years, running a laboratory for NATO. And then here is some more modularity. This is structured art. Now, that's a quote from Frank Lloyd Wright, normally referring to his woodblock prints and what he sees in Japanese art. There's a whole reading from a published book by Frank Lloyd Wright on Japanese prints. That's you probably should be reading. And then I'm saying also here, draw some parallels to what you've seen in this other lecture. You can click on here if you haven't already viewed this for this course, which you probably should have. Japanese architecture and urban design, and the Ken system and the modularity of that, and based on the tatami, which means mat, but there's very specific size, and everything, the rooms are scaled to that size. So speaking of that. Now, this is a very important turning point in Frank Lloyd Wright's life. So I've got it mostly in green here. He's recovering from the trauma. He meets Olga, and Olga, he meets her at a classical music event, I believe it was. It might have been the ballet. But anyway, she's much younger. She's only 30, but she's got some real serious experience. And he's 60, and this is where his life really changes. So he was kind of fizzling out a little bit, and then she really infuses some energy. So she's got a long, I'm going to read all this here, but she's from an aristocrat. Her mother was a general. Her father was a head chief justice of the country in Europe, and her father went blind, and she was his eyes, so she's reading for him. And then at age 20, she marries a Russian architect. And then she's also introduced to this Greco-Armenian mystic and philosopher. And so she kind of follows his ways. During the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, fled Russia with the followers, and then they developed this institute, a mind, heart, and body, mind, body, spirit we speak of all the time. A lot of my courses, going back 20 years, not a lot, but the freshman seminar has always had a mind, body, spirit component, and some of my other courses. So she's believing that, preaching that, and then she's become a dancer, musician, educator, and philosopher. And you'll see later on that she's the one who helps Frank Lloyd Wright establish the fellowship, brings in students for Masters of Architecture degrees, and that was running. It had a little trouble recently in 2020. It's moving to a new place, but she ran it for almost 25 years after Frank Lloyd Wright died, and she was married to him. He died at 91, and so they're together 30 years. Even though 60 seems like an old age, she helped bring him back to life. So it's worth mentioning her more than just here. You'll see again in other lectures of mine where she's involved in starting things, motivating, and organizing, and running essentially a commune in ways that were criticized by that during the Cold War and politics of that. But it was more of a utopian, idealist social order, if you will. So he's had a whole life now of children and other wives and a mistress. He's 60 years old. He's lived through Industrial Revolution, visiting Japan, living in Italy. And now the stock market has just crashed, and the United States is entering into the Great Depression. So now at age 61, he's dealing with the Great Depression. Decade after that, World War II will start. Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, now enemies of the United States, where he had lived a while beforehand in both of those places, or he visited Germany and lived in Italy, also war with Italy. Modernism, although he's different from other modern architects, he has no money at this time. They start the fellowship then, and that's Olga's idea, to start a school. Some notable things in architecture we'll look at is Falling Water, Broadacre City, Usonian houses, Johnson Wax buildings, and Taliesin West, and other Arizona works. Now they're in the Great Depression, so there's less wealthy clients. Taliesin has been created, Olga's idea. Now they have a school. It's somewhat of a social kind of utopian architectural commune, perhaps from what she's learned in Europe. New socialist ideas, presumably Olga's may be affecting that also, with Broadacre City, 1 acre plot per person in a somewhat uniform kind of city plan. And later, after World War II, small affordable homes, Usonian homes. And then the fellowships expanded to Taliesin West, so they spend time in Wisconsin and then in Arizona, 6 months at a time. And they do that for many decades. With the students, a couple noteworthy wealthy clients, however, during the Depression is the Falling Water in 1935 and the Johnson Wax Building in 1936. So when they start to school, there's no set curriculum. It's mostly everybody just watching Frank Lloyd Wright and then helping out as apprentices. And then they also have work chores quite a bit to be part of the community. So now Broadacre City is happening around this time in the Great Depression. So he's designing somewhat of a utopian ideal city. Now we're going to talk about a very important one of his works, a masterpiece. Everybody knows it. It's probably the one thing that most people in the world will reference when you ask them about Frank Lloyd Wright. It's Falling Water. And here's some initial images from my first architecture theory lecture in 2006. And you can see a link to that and more details if you go to my architecture theory course on my website. This is a field trip that we went on with Dr. Cosmer in 2015. The architecture students, individualized majors and just one at that time, and minors. Some of our students. Falling Water. There's me. Also my partner in creating the minor, Dr. Ricci. Milt Fridley, long-established sculptor. Christy Arnold, expert in painting and drawing, exhibits all over the world. There's the students, again outside the building. Next, very important thing now is Taliesin West. So Olga and he have now opened this up, and now Taliesin is in, the fellowship is in 2 places now. And they travel back and forth 6 months at a time in each place. And that continued, and actually continued right up to the present with the faculty and students doing that every 6 months. So I'll go quickly through here just some slides of a visit that I had in Taliesin West this past, I'm recording this in 2020, and visited in January of 2020. Here's the exterior. Here's a tour guide, excellent tour guide. Here's my son. There's a story behind this. Now this is the living room, entry to the living room area. You can see all the natural daylighting and ventilation. This is the table in the corner of the living room, looking out into the courtyard. This is Olga's bedroom, and it opens right to the outside. This is Frank Lloyd Wright's bedroom, and he had 2 beds, and he told the apprentices if he's sleeping on the one side, that means he doesn't want to be disturbed. If he's on the other side, he can be awoken to be asked questions. This is more of his bedroom. More of his bedroom. Bookshelves. This is his bathroom. This is looking to the outside. Looking to the courtyard. A little closer view. You can see this, the statue. I don't believe it's from Midway Gardens, but it's a facsimile of that, a reconstruction of that. We'll look at that more in a second. This is looking back into the room. This is the exit out of the room. Looking back into the courtyard again. Looking from the courtyard back into the room. And so here's a statue, like what you would find in Midway Gardens, although the Midway Gardens ones were carved out of stone and not painted. A couple more pictures of that. This is a tree growing up through the roof, essentially, or an opening. in the building. Reminds you of organic design, reminds me of other pictures in the past, including ones I've taken in Japan and Oak Park. This is looking back through the building. We were just on the other side in the previous pictures. Now we're on this side, and there's a pool, a little sculpture on the roof, view out the back. Tour guide's talking about the people living upstairs, still there. This is the way out, and also a little sculpture with a breezed fire. Nice picture of the sunlight coming through here. Some arbors leading to the way almost at the end of the tour. Actually leading to first the studio where the students are. Architecture students. This is Christmas break, so most of them are not there. One student is. She hears that Joseph's interested in graduate schools. Actually been accepted to several at this point. And so they talk about it. Exchange some information. Another picture of the full studio. Now one more place we're going to look at after this reflecting pool. As we go into this building. It's going to be like a lecture hall. And so it's ramped down. This is a funny thing here. He's talking about, well, first of all, you can see in the back corner that triangle shape is so you can fit a piano in there. So he's had music now, both literally and an abstraction of his building designs in all of his buildings. And that cubby hole is just for a piano to fit. And now this volunteer from the tour is going to play a little thing as the watch this little video, see what the tour guide does. So hopefully this will play. This is a video. Watch that. Very short.
Wanted her dancers this way. So he actually had the boys blow a hole in the wall, called it a niche. The roof to the niche matches the roof to the piano when you raise it up. Now he would put that niche in your home, in the ladder homes, and you'd walk in and you'd say, I remember that when I was drunk. And he'd always say, well, that's where you're going to put the piano you're going to buy it tomorrow. And you would do it for him. Would you give up and go down there? Yeah, great picture.
More of his indirect lighting integrated into as fixtures into the building. Now they gave us an extra tour when the rest of the tour group had to leave because I teach architecture because my son was looking at grad schools at the time. And they let us look at the performance space, which you'll see pictures of in a second. Library study room. There were some students in there at the time. And, they saw us and we looked at them, but they didn't want us to take pictures of them there because they were kind of quietly studying. And then we were given a tour of where the students build their houses, so their dwellings in the desert, which is a requirement for the students in Arizona. In Madison, Wisconsin, they'd live in a building that's built for them. But while they're in Scottsdale and Phoenix, Arizona, then at Taliesin West, they need to build their own dwelling. So this is the building we're going in, and this was part of the private tour, a big performance center they let us take a look at. And then we walked around where the students build their dwellings. We didn't go up close, mainly because I was wearing sandals, and there are snakes and scorpions in the desert. Dwelling by a student, another dwelling by a student. Just a little picture I took of a cactus growing in a wall. And then a picture of just a cactus on the site. This take actually hundreds of years to get this size, and they're protected. Frank Lloyd Wright also attempted to make smaller, affordable homes, the Usonian homes, beginning in 1937 and continuing for the rest of his life, several dozen of these. Here's a list with links that you can go and see a number of these homes if you like. So we end this sixth of a seven-part lecture series on Frank Lloyd Wright at 1945 because that's the end of World War II, which is the significant thing for the entire world. Frank Lloyd Wright had lived in Europe, in Italy, and visited Germany, and lived in Japan, and now we just had to go to war with those two countries, and so the whole world had been kind of ripped apart. But it's about to start a good time now after World War II. When the baby boom starts, the GI Bill will give people money for homes, and so it's the beginning of a good time. Now I have a footnote down here for those who might want to look at it. My father in World War II, fighting against the Japanese, and then almost going to the Korean War. Although he always had kind of a love of Japanese gardens, and even though he had to fight Japanese, he empathized with the plight of what happened to their country because of it. And then the next slide, also at 85, this is one of his sons, David Wright's house, went up for sale. It actually, there was a petition went around I signed 5, 6, 7 years ago to save this building from demolition and rebuilding on the site because the land's valuable. And then that worked, and it was going to be donated to the Frank Lloyd Wright School and Trust, which were one thing at one time. They're separating right now somewhat. But anyway, this is it's up for sale again now because the local people around the area didn't want the tourists coming if it was part of the Taliesin Fellowship. It's another design we visited. This is the Harold Price House in Phoenix, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. It was 87. Here's another hexagon shape this is out in western Pennsylvania near Falling Water, called Kentuck Knob. This is one that we visited where our main objective for the field trip we had was to see Falling Water, but we also went to this Usonian home, and it was certainly worthwhile. It's Kentuck Knob in Pennsylvania. Also a hexagon kind of theme. There's a sculpture garden also. I did not put pictures in here of that, an adjacent sculpture garden to all of this. So now we're talking about his age 79 to 91 here. The fellowship's continued. He has students follow him to Madison, Wisconsin for 6 months, and then Taliesin, or then Scottsdale, Arizona, Taliesin West. One last slide, and I want you to definitely follow this. Go find the PDF or the PPTX with audio. If you're watching this on YouTube, there'll be links to those in the comments. But do listen to this. This is 9 minutes long, and some important words of Frank Lloyd Wright. And I'll just read, I'll close here with reading a quote from Frank Lloyd Wright. He says, "Science will eventually join with art and religion, and when they are one, then we will begin to have the right kind of education. We will have the right kind of buildings, and we will have a greatly improved method of life." So now that we're at the last lecture of a 7-part lecture series of Frank Lloyd Wright's life and works over his almost 92-year life and over 70-year career of designs, over 500 built designs, approximately 1,000 designs on paper. Let's look at the synthesis of his organic design principles from his several books and also other sources of my own experience through life. And this is my own interpretation of those principles. So, conforming to the site, firstly, um, this is a number of meanings. So, the sun, following the sun's trajectories at different times of day and throughout the seasons, and bringing it into the house, and depending where you are, what latitude on the Earth, you obey those sun angles. You use it for passive solar lighting and heating and cooling. Conforming to the topography. Don't build a house on top of the hill. It destroys the hill, he would say. Build it on the side, like Taliesin means shining brow, so it's like brow on the side of the hill, like on face. Certainly conforming to the environment, the natural vegetation. Don't just scrape the lot clean like some developers will do. But adhere to the environment, respect the environment. You learn that in a number of ways through his Unitarian belief system and his Japanese philosophies and influences there, and growing up in nature on the farm. Pinwheeled planes in the cruciform. That you found in some early designs. It was a precursor to what would then be the prairie school design style, the prairie school designs with broad central chimneys and long cantilevers and overhangs and balconies, part of those planes. The folded plane, so imagining like in origami, and there was actually folding, paper folding, and the verbal methods of his mother, but more formally in Japanese origami, continuity, wall, ceiling, and floors become one. Simple geometries from the foible blocks and the foible system that his mother used, and in educating him and homeschooling him, and you see that throughout his designs, throughout his life. The human scale, as opposed to a monumental scale, the human scale, designing to the scale of the human. And it's said that his buildings seem to have a little lower ceiling height because he was short, and that is actually true. Open floor plan, he's a pioneer of that. He picked up on that some first when he saw the Japanese exposition in the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, and then when he visited Japan twice and then lived there for 3 years. That's certainly a principle in Japanese design that you'll see. And so he's implementing that in a time where there's Victorian is very common, and the Victorian is a compartmentalized box type rooms, and so he's destroying the box and then creating a flow between rooms, inside and outside. And now walls become screens, band of windows, framing views like the Engawa, which is essentially a covered porch, but it's an integral part of the Japanese design, bringing inside out and outside in flow between the spaces. Form and function R1, a harmony, not one following the other secondarily, but a harmony, a joining. And this stems back to Chinese philosophy, which is also at the root of Buddhism in China and then in Japan, and then also Shintoism in Japan, originally from Taoism mixing with indigenous, Taoism from China mixing with indigenous tribal religions of early Japan. So this stems way back, this yin and yang idea. And that's what he meant, and that's what he corrected people when they'd say, oh, you mean form follows after function. No. I mean, Louis Sullivan actually coined the phrase more, and he meant that a little more literally. And there was actually more ancient root to the original saying. But Frank Lloyd Wright corrected everybody and said this is a complementary kind of form and function together. When he means form following functions, like in a circle. So a unified whole is an extension of that. Inside and out, orchestrating the sun. Bring the nature out of materials. So look for the nature within the materials and bring it out. But innovate also. So not just natural materials in natural state, but also some new ideas. He invented the textile blocks, with the Mayan patterns for reasons of his own personal journey. uh, but nevertheless modular, kind of modular textile blocks cast out of concrete, and then woven with reinforcing steel. Not so much reinforced concrete like you would know it nowadays. He made these textile blocks and then kind of threaded the reinforcing steel through it. Also, the modular Ken design seems to have influenced him. That's a modular over fixed units of the tatami, the fixed unit dimensions of the tatami mat. Tatami means mat in Japanese. Structural art, like in nature. The veins and the leaves, that structure is defining the space. The interior space made it exterior as architecture. That's why we do barn frame, post and beam, mortise and tenon kind of architectural projects leading up to the shell that's defined by that interior. We do that as an exercise in several of my architecture courses. At this point I'm recording this, I've taught 7 different architecture courses, actually 9 depending on how you count it. If you can't count the independent research and the variation of the one course. But so anyway, structural art, yes, we just mentioned that. Now also soft, warm, optimistic color tones. Oh, before we go on, structural art, he first mentions that, or he certainly emphasizes it in his book on woodblock prints that he publishes. And he's speaking of how there's always structure in the art itself. And that's important if you think about how his art works and looks. So next, soft, warm, optimistic color tones of earth and autumn leaves. Assimilating fixtures into the structure. So the indirect lighting and recessed lighting and the ceilings and the floors and the way he uses light and illumination is a key thing in assimilating the fixtures. Also the built-in furniture. He very often specifies the furnishings. The cabinet work certainly, but more than that, actual furniture also. And even beyond that with the dishware and curtains sometimes, and even an evening gown. Many plants and planters. Architecture equals music. Now this stems back to his father, who was a professional musician. Now he was a preacher and also a lawyer and a school superintendent. He's highly educated, bachelor's and master's from Colgate University. For the time, that's extremely highly educated. But he was mostly known for his being a musician. He was also a lover of the arts too, including Asian type things. So certainly had an influence on Frank Lloyd Wright, and you see that both symbolically through the organizing of architecture like a symphony, and other analogies to music, as well as literally. So he would specify special spaces for pianos to go, and even specify organs in some of the buildings. Churches, of course, but also like an office building. Architect mentor Louis Sullivan. Now, he had several mentors, and Louis Sullivan was definitely the most influential. And he's also part of the organic design beginnings, because both Frank Lloyd Wright and Louis Sullivan disliked the neoclassical Roman and Greek, especially in the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, but also the Victorian. They want to do something a little different. So they were both rebels and pioneers in architecture, and Louis Sullivan actually had some literally organic type of detailing to some of his walls and balconies, and so you see that, but not so much in the form of things, but again they're an influence. Now the arts and crafts movement was an influence, and that in England and then in the United States. As a movement to simpler handmade crafts, somewhat of a reaction to the industrialization and the machine. Now, Frank Lloyd Wright also lived in Italy first after he went off with the wife of one of his clients to Italy for a year, and also visited Germany and Paris and Austria. Published a book with a German publisher, but then lived and Fiesole, Italy, right outside of Florence, and I've been right to where he was there. It's a beautiful place, and he was there for more than a year. And if you've been to Italy at all, you can see how that would influence you for a lifetime, even with one visit. I've been there 6 times and lived for a month teaching a course, and I feel it. And now he's lived there for more than a year, so you don't hear it mentioned much. But I believe Italy, you can see influences in the lectures. You go back and look, you'll see my mention of it, the influence of Italy. Now Japan, everybody's all over this now. Now I certainly have pointed out a number of places here throughout the lecture series, and so it's pretty obvious now. And so I even have pictures that I took in Japan before the archives released his actual pictures, which are now at Columbia University. And then when they posted those, I put them side by side, and many of the same pictures I could see. Everybody could see how he was influenced. Then you see a slide here of a Japanese garden in Narita that I visited. We were there for 3 weeks. I was a keynote speaker in Osaka, an architectural talk I gave for an hour. And then we lived in Kyoto for about 2 weeks. Also was in Narita for several days. And so this picture of a huge Japanese garden with some keywords from my colleague of Japanese culture and language, Mahawa Bhattacharya, and just about inner and outer, insider, outsider, and shame and group harmony. That's a key thing. Wa. I teach that in a number of my courses. And so that you see that in the spirit of the architecture, those keywords, the culture of Japan in the the vernacular of the architecture. Then lastly, in the corner here, you see a Japanese Shinto shrine gate, which represents the entry from the human world into the spirit world. This is a huge gate. You can see at the bottom there, that little block is actually a truck tractor trailer. So it'll give you the idea of the size of this shrine.